Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that, let's be honest, we've all thought about at some point: cheating in online games.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those things that just fascinates us, right? Like, why do people do it? What's going on in their heads?
And for this deep dive, we're going to focus on two specific games: chess and FIFA.
Interesting choices.
Yeah, because they really represent you very different types of gameplay, which, as we'll see, actually leads to different types of cheating. But before we get into the how and why, I just want to lay out kind of the mission here. We're not just going to skim the surface. I mean, this is a PhD level show, right?
Right, we got to go deep.
Exactly. So we're going to be pulling from psychology, tech, even touch on some ethics. It's going to get juicy.
I'm ready. Lay it on me.
All right, so let's start with the basics. What are some of the most common ways people actually cheat in these games? I mean, I know some of the lingo like aimbots and engine use, but paint me a picture.
Okay, so in chess, now that we're in the digital age, the big odd one is engine use.
Engine use.
Yeah, like imagine having a supercomputer whispering the best move in your ear for every single turn. That's basically what these engines are, like stockfish, super powerful chess AIs, and some players are using them secretly during games, pretending it's just them, deep in thought.
Wow. So sneaky.
Right, and then some even pre-program like opening moves.
So they can like appear like a grandmaster from the start.
Exactly. It's like having a digital ghost playing alongside them.
Crazy. Okay, so what about FIFA then? Because obviously it's a completely different type of game, right? It's real-time, action-packed.
Totally different beast. And the cheats reflect that. So in FIFA, you see a lot of exploits that target either the game's physics or, even more deviously, the opponent's connection.
Oh man, I can see where this is going.
Yeah, so things like aimbots, right? Giving you these impossibly accurate shots, like even pros couldn't pull that off consistently.
Right, right. It's so obvious and you see it.
Exactly. And then there's lag switching.
Oh, lag switching. Ugh.
The worst. Intentionally messing with your opponent's internet, creating these delays, making them vulnerable.
So frustrating.
Yeah, and then we can't forget about the bots. Not even playing the game in the traditional sense, just grinding away, farming in-game currency to sell for real money.
So it's like almost a whole separate economy happening there.
It is wild, isn't it?
It is. So, okay, we've got a good sense of how people are cheating, but now for the really interesting part: why? Why go through all this trouble? I mean, shouldn't playing games be about, the challenge, the fun?
Well, that's where the psychology comes in. And it's not as simple as people are just bad, right? We have to look at basic human needs, like this desire to feel competent, connected, even autonomous.
That makes me think of self-determination theory.
SDT.
It emphasizes those core needs. So are you saying that some players who maybe struggle to meet those needs in other areas of life, they turn to cheating as a way to compensate?
It's a possibility, right? Think about it. Let's say you're a FIFA player, but you're having a rough time at work, feeling stuck, not in control.
Right. I can see that.
Suddenly, in FIFA, you discover an aimbot. And it's not just a cheat anymore. It's a way to get back that feeling of power, of agency, even if it's artificial. You start winning, you're dominating, and that dopamine rush, it's intoxicating.
Like a quick fix.
Exactly, a temporary escape.
But I got to imagine it's not just about fulfilling those needs. Like, how do people actually rationalize cheating? Because they know it's wrong, right? So do they just convince themselves it's okay?
Well, this is where we get into the fascinating world of moral disengagement. It's like people build these mental walls to separate their actions from their morals.
So they're not bad people. They just...
Right, they come up with justifications. Everyone's doing it, or the game's rigged anyway, shifting the blame outward.
So in the heat of the moment, facing a loss, feeling that pressure to win...
Those justifications start to feel very real. It's about protecting their ego, avoiding that guilt.
Fascinating. So it's like we're seeing how the psychology of the individual player and the context of the game itself, they kind of collide to create this perfect storm for cheating.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to understand the psychological side. It's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about understanding the whole picture. And that's where things get even more interesting. Because once we start looking at cheating as this psychological phenomenon, not just like a moral failing, it opens up all these new possibilities for how we can actually address it.
So instead of just trying to like police the behavior, we're talking about getting to the root cause.
Exactly.
Okay, so what kind of interventions are we talking about here?
Well, one area that's really promising is something called nudges. It comes from behavioral economics.
Nudges. Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so basically nudges are these subtle cues or hints built into the game environment itself that can kind of gently steer players towards maybe more ethical choices.
So, like, how would that even work? You can give me an example.
Absolutely. Let's say in FIFA, you have a player who's being super aggressive, like right on the edge of the rules, constantly making these harsh tackles.
Yeah, I've played against those guys.
Right. So the game could actually detect this pattern and like offer a little nudge, a pop-up message maybe, reminding them of the fair play policy or like, hey, another foul and you're getting a red card.
Oh, interesting. So it's not an actual punishment, just a reminder to be cool.
Exactly. A gentle nudge in the right direction.
I like that. What about rewarding good behavior? Is that a thing?
Oh, totally. Some games are already experimenting with that, like giving players bonus points for being good sports, complimenting their opponent, or even unlocking special achievements for consistently playing fair.
Oh, I love that. So you're basically shifting the whole reward system, right? Like instead of just trying to avoid getting punished, you're actually incentivized to be a good player.
Exactly. It taps into intrinsic motivation, that feeling of, hey, I actually want to play fair.
Right. It becomes part of your identity as a player.
Yep. And the cool thing about these nudges is that they often work on a subconscious level.
Oh, like subliminal messaging.
Kind of. Players might not even realize they're being influenced, but it can still have a real impact on their behavior.
It reminds me of those studies on framing effects, like how just a subtle change in wording can totally affect how people make decisions.
Exactly. It's about framing the choice in a way that highlights the ethical dimension.
So nudges are cool and all, but what about more direct interventions? Like, can you actually teach people to be like more ethical gamers?
Well, there's this idea of moral re-engagement programs.
Moral re-engagement. Sounds intense.
It's actually pretty simple. Imagine like a tutorial within a game, but instead of just being about the rules, it actually delves into the psychology of cheating, like getting players to think about the consequences of their actions for themselves and for others.
So instead of just don't use aimbots, it's more like,
Right? It might show them a scenario like a player losing a crucial match because their opponent was cheating, and really emphasizing the emotional impact, how it ripples out and affects the whole community.
oh, so you're making it personal, appealing to their empathy.
Exactly. Some researchers are even exploring using virtual reality for this. Like, imagine a VR experience where you literally step into the shoes of someone who's been cheated against.
Wow, that would be powerful.
Right? You'd feel that sense of betrayal, that frustration, and hopefully it would make you less likely to do the same thing to someone else.
It's like those empathy training programs they use in conflict resolution, but for gaming.
Exactly. And ultimately, the hope is that by building a stronger sense of community, shared values, that cheating just becomes less appealing. It's like, why would I want to do that to my fellow players?
Yeah, that makes sense. But let's be real for a second. Even with all these efforts, some people are still going to cheat, right? Like there's always going to be those individuals who are just determined to exploit the system no matter what.
That's true. Which is why we also need to think about creating systems that are not only preventive, but also resilient.
Resilient. Okay, what does that mean?
It means building systems that can adapt, evolve as new cheating methods emerge. Because the cheaters are always going to be trying to stay one step ahead.
Right, it's like an arms race. So how do we do that? How do we create a system they can actually keep up?
Well, one of the most promising avenues is data analysis and machine learning. By analyzing huge amounts of in-game data, we can start to identify patterns and anomalies that might indicate cheating behavior.
So instead of just reacting to known cheats, we can actually start to anticipate new ones.
Exactly. And machine learning algorithms are getting so sophisticated now, they can not only detect those known patterns, but they can also pick up on new emerging ones.
So it's like having a super detective AI on the case, constantly scanning for suspicious activity.
That's a great way to put it. Imagine a system that can analyze a player's behavior across multiple games, looking for those subtle tells that might point to cheating.
That sounds incredibly powerful, but also a bit creepy, you know? Like how much data are we collecting on players? And what about false positives? What if the system gets it wrong?
Those are all valid concerns, and it's why ethic has to be a core part of this conversation. We can't just blindly implement these technologies without considering the potential downsides.
So it's about finding that balance, right? Between leveraging the power of technology and protecting player privacy.
Exactly, and that requires open communication, transparency. Game developers, researchers, and most importantly, the players themselves need to be part of this discussion.
It's about creating a culture where fairness and integrity aren't just rules that are enforced from above, but values that are shared and embraced to the community.
Exactly, where cheating is seen not just as like breaking the rules, but as a betrayal of trust. Like, you're letting us down, man.
Right, it becomes a social thing, not just a technical one.
Exactly.
This brings us to a really interesting question then. Like, if we could accurately predict who's most likely to cheat, based on their personality, their in-game behavior, what should we even do with that knowledge?
That's a huge ethical question, right? Like, do we intervene preemptively? Do we offer support to those players who are identified as high risk? Do we design games in a way that minimizes temptation?
Whoa, so we're talking about like preventing cheating before it even happens.
It's a possibility. And this is where the intersection of psychology, technology, game design, it all comes together. We need to be thinking about how we can leverage our understanding of human behavior to create a gaming world that is not only fun and engaging, but also ethically sound.
This is so fascinating. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface. Before we wrap up, though, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about cross-game learning. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a crucial point. We can't treat each game as like this isolated island when it comes to cheating. The psychology behind it, the motivations, they're often universal, even if the specific methods are different.
So what can different games, different online spaces, learn from each other in terms of like how to combat cheating? Are there any good examples of this already happening?
Definitely. For example, FIFA actually took inspiration from the world of chess when it came to tackling cheating in their pro tournaments.
Really? How so?
They introduced something called verified play, where players have to prove their identity, kind of like in professional chess, and it made a huge difference. Cheating incidents dropped significantly.
So by borrowing from chess, they were able to create a much more secure, trustworthy environment.
Exactly. And it just goes to show how important it is to share these best practices, to look outside your own little bubble for solutions.
Are there any other examples of like cross-game learning that you find particularly interesting?
One that comes to mind is Dota 2. They have this really cool community-driven cheat review system.
Oh, what's that like?
So basically, experienced players can actually review reports of cheating and help decide whether someone should be punished.
Wow, so it's like a jury of your peers, but for gaming.
Exactly, and it's proven to be super effective. Not only does it catch cheaters, but it also creates this sense of shared responsibility. Like, the players themselves are involved in keeping the game fair.
That's really cool. And it probably deters some people from cheating in the first place, knowing that their actions are being scrutinized by other players.
Absolutely, it taps into that social pressure, that desire to be seen as a good member of the community.
Right. So I'm thinking, could something like that work in chess? Like, could we create a similar community-driven system?
That's a great question. It would definitely require a lot of careful thought and planning, but it's definitely an idea worth exploring.
Yeah, it could be a real game changer.
It could, and it really speaks to the bigger point, which is that combating cheating isn't just about technology or rules. It's about building a culture of integrity, fair play, where cheating is seen as like the ultimate no-no.
Right. It becomes a cultural taboo.
Exactly, and I think we're starting to see that shift happening, which is really encouraging.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. We've covered so much about the psychology of cheating, from those subtle nudges to the potential of these super sophisticated AI systems. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think at the end of the day, what we really need to remember is that cheating, it's not just about like bad people, you know? It's not a simple lack of willpower or anything. It's way more complex than that.
We've seen how it's tied to psychology, to social dynamics, even to how the games themselves are designed.
Exactly. And once we understand that, we can start to develop solutions that actually work. We need to move beyond just punishing cheaters and think about preventing it from happening in the first place.
Right? Like, how do we make it less appealing, less tempting?
Exactly.
And we've talked about some really cool ideas like those nudges, moral re-engagement programs, even those community-driven review systems where players themselves are part of the solution.
Right. It's about changing the whole culture around cheating.
And then, of course, we've got technology like data analysis and machine learning have huge potential to help us identify cheating behavior.
Oh, absolutely. But we got to be careful with that too. We can't just go around collecting tons of data on players without thinking about the ethical implications.
Right, privacy is super important. It's about finding that balance, using technology responsibly.
Exactly. And that's why communication is key. Game developers, researchers, players, we all need to be talking to each other, working together.
To make sure we're creating a gaming world that's fun, engaging, but also ethically sound.
Exactly. Where the thrill of the game, that competition, that desire to be the best, it can all exist alongside this deep respect for the rules, for fair play.
Right? Because at the end of the day, that's what makes games truly rewarding.
Well said. And I really think this whole deep dive has shown us that the conversation about cheating, it's actually a conversation about our values.
About what kind of gaming world we want to create.
You know, what kind of people we want to be.
It's a conversation that goes beyond just gaming too, right? Like these ideas about ethics, fairness, accountability, they matter in the real world too.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, this has been an amazing exploration of the psychology of cheating. We've covered so much ground, learned so much.
It's been a real deep dive.
It has. But I think it's time to wrap things up. Any final thoughts before we go?
Just this, the game is always more fun, more meaningful when we all play by the rules.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep playing fair.